Eleanor Whitmore's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She stood behind her store counter in Red Hollow, Arizona, listening to the gunshots still ringing down Main Street. A stranger stood in the dust, facing Sheriff Marcus Hale, with nothing but steady eyes and an old promise carved into a cottonwood tree 22 years ago. She knew that voice before she saw his face. The barefoot boy who swore he'd come back had finally returned, wealthier, harder, and carrying shadows no woman should want to understand. But Eleanor already did. If this story speaks to your heart, subscribe to our channel and stay with me until the very end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I'd love to see just how far this story travels. Eleanor pressed both palms flat against the counter. Her breath came short. Her chest felt tight, like someone had cinched a rope around her ribs and pulled. She knew that voice. Lord help her. She knew it the way a woman knows thunder before rain, deep in her bones, before her mind caught up. I didn't come back for trouble. The words drifted through the open door of Whitmore General Store like smoke from a fired gun. I came back to keep a promise. Eleanor closed her eyes. 22 years. 22 years since a barefoot boy with dust on his knees and holes in his shirt stood beneath the cottonwood tree by the creek and carved 2 sets of initials into the bark with a dull pocket knife. J.C. plus E.W. He'd looked at her with those serious gray eyes, too serious for a boy of 12, and said, "I'll come back for you when I'm a man worth marrying." She'd been 10 years old. She'd believed every word. And then he was gone. His mother packed what little they had into a broken wagon and disappeared down the south road before sunrise. No goodbye, no letter, no word for 22 years. Eleanor had waited. Then she'd stopped waiting. Then she'd stopped believing. And now, on the hottest morning in July, with the sun turning Main Street into a furnace, that voice had come back. She forced her eyes open and walked to the doorway. The man standing in the middle of the street was tall, broad through the shoulders. He wore a dark coat despite the heat, and his hat sat low, casting shadow across a jaw that hadn't known softness in a long time. His boots were good leather. His horse, tied to the post behind him, was a fine chestnut mare, the kind only money could buy. Sheriff Marcus Hale stood 10 paces from him, hand resting on his holster, badge catching the morning light. "Mister," Hale said, slow and deliberate, "I don't know you, and I don't recall inviting you." "You wouldn't," the stranger replied. "I left before you pinned that badge on." Hale's eyes narrowed. "Then you got no business here." "I got business with the Whitmores." That name hit Eleanor like a slap. She gripped the doorframe. Hale tilted his head. "The Whitmores don't need business from strangers." "I ain't a stranger." The man took one step forward, not aggressive, just certain. "My name is James Callahan. I grew up on the dirt road past Miller's Creek. My mother washed clothes for this town, and I made a promise to someone here before I left." Silence fell across Main Street. Old Bert from the feed store leaned forward on his bench. Clara Hayes stopped sweeping her porch. 2 cowboys at the water trough turned around. Red Hollow was watching. Hale's jaw tightened. "Callahan," he repeated, testing the name like a man tasting something bitter. "I heard that name before." "I reckon you have." "Heard a Callahan killed a man in Abilene." "That was self-defense, proved in court." "Heard a Callahan took land from a widow in Santa Fe." "I bought that land fair. She came to me. Papers filed with the territorial office." Hale took a step closer. "And now a Callahan rides into my town, fires a shot in the air, and says he's here on a promise." "The shot was for a rattlesnake at my horse's feet," Jace said quietly. "You're welcome to check." Hale didn't check. He stared at Callahan the way a dog stares at a wolf, sizing up, deciding whether to bark or back down. "You can water your horse," Hale said finally. "Then you ride on." "I'll water my horse," Jace said, "but I ain't riding anywhere till I've spoken to Henry Whitmore." Eleanor's father. Her heart hammered. She stepped back from the doorway before anyone could see her face. She pressed her back against the wall of the store and breathed. 1 breath. 2. 3. "Eleanor?" Her father's voice came from the back room. Henry Whitmore appeared in the doorway between the store and their living quarters, leaning on his cane. 68 years old, white-haired, still sharp-eyed as a hawk. "What was that shot?" he asked. "Rattlesnake," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "And the commotion?" She swallowed. "There's a man on Main Street. Says his name is James Callahan." Henry went still. Completely, absolutely still. The way a man goes still when the past walks through the door uninvited. "Callahan," he said softly. "Mary Callahan's boy?" "Yes, Papa." Henry looked at his daughter. He studied her face the way only a father can, reading what she wouldn't say, seeing what she tried to hide. "You remember him," Henry said. It wasn't a question. "I remember a boy," Eleanor said. "That was a long time ago." Henry nodded slowly. Then he straightened his shoulders, adjusted his vest, and walked toward the front door. "Papa, you don't have to—" "A Callahan came to see me," Henry said firmly. "I'll see him." He stepped out onto the porch. Eleanor followed because she couldn't not follow. Because her feet moved before her mind gave permission. Because 22 years of silence had just ended with a gunshot and a name. And she needed to see his face. James Callahan had moved to the water trough. His horse drank while he stood with his back straight, hat in his hands now, watching the street with eyes that missed nothing. When he saw Henry Whitmore on the porch, something shifted in his expression. Something cracked, just for a moment, behind the hardness. He walked forward, stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Mr. Whitmore," he said. His voice was rough. "I don't expect you to remember me." "I remember every child who grew up in this town," Henry said. "You're Mary's boy. You used to stack flour sacks in my store for penny candy." Jace's throat moved. "Yes, sir." "Your mother was a good woman." "She was." "She passed?" 7 years ago. Pneumonia." Henry nodded, slow and heavy. "I'm sorry to hear it." "Thank you, sir." A pause settled between them. The kind of pause that holds 22 years of living in it. "You've done well for yourself," Henry said, glancing at the horse, the coat, the boots. "I worked for it," Jace said simply. "I don't doubt that." Henry studied him. "What brings you back to Red Hollow, son?" Jace looked up at the porch. His eyes found Eleanor and held. She felt it like a physical thing, that gaze landing on her, settling, recognizing. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he thought he'd lost forever, and suddenly found again, whole and real, and standing right there. "I made a promise," Jace said. He wasn't talking to Henry anymore. Eleanor's chin lifted. "Promises made by children don't hold, Mr. Callahan." The words came out sharp, sharper than she intended. But she'd had 22 years to build walls, and she wasn't about to let them fall because a man with sad eyes said pretty words on a dusty street. Jace didn't flinch. He nodded once. "You're right, ma'am. A child's promise don't hold." He put his hat back on. "But I ain't a child anymore." Behind them, at the far end of Main Street, Sheriff Hale stood watching. His hand hadn't left his holster. By evening, News of James Callahan's return had traveled through every house, every shop, every fence post in Red Hollow. Clara Hayes told Martha Pike, who told the pastor's wife, who told the women at the quilting circle, who told their husbands, who told the men at the saloon. "Callahan's back." "The poor boy? Mary's son?" "He ain't poor no more. Got a ranch in New Mexico. Cattle, horses, land." "Then what's he want here?" "Says he made a promise." "To who?" Silence. Knowing looks. Glances toward Whitmore General Store. "To Eleanor." The name passed through town like a match through dry grass. Eleanor Whitmore, 32 years old, unmarried, running her father's store and sitting on the town council. The woman half the town respected, and the other half couldn't figure out. Too smart for most men, too proud for the rest. And now the boy she'd once carved initials with had ridden back into town, looking like money and trouble in equal measure. At the Whitmore supper table that night, Henry set down his fork and looked at his daughter. "He asked to stay." Eleanor's hand paused over her plate. "Stay where?" "Here, the spare room." "Papa?" "I offered," Henry said calmly. "The boarding house is full up with railroad surveyors, and I won't have a man who stacked my flour sacks sleeping in a stable." "He's not that boy anymore." "No," Henry agreed. "He's a man who rode 500 miles to keep his word. That means something to me." Eleanor set her fork down. "It means something to you because you see honor in it." "And you don't?" She looked at her father, this man who'd raised her alone after her mother died, who'd taught her to read ledgers and stand her ground in town meetings, who'd never once told her she needed a husband to be whole. "I see a man I don't know," Eleanor said carefully, "wearing the face of a boy I once trusted." Henry reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His palm was warm and rough with age. "Then get to know the man," he said, "and decide for yourself." She didn't answer, but she didn't say no. Jace Callahan moved into the spare room that night. He was quiet. That was the first thing Eleanor noticed. Not shy quiet, not uncomfortable quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from a man who's learned that silence is safer than speech, that watching is wiser than talking, that the world gives its secrets to those who listen. He rose before dawn. She heard him through the wall, boots on the floor, the creak of the back door, the soft sound of him drawing water from the well. When she came downstairs, the stove was already lit, coffee already made. "You didn't have to do that," she said from the kitchen doorway. Jay stood by the stove, sleeves rolled to his elbows, pouring coffee into a tin cup. He looked up. "Old habit," he said. "My mother was always up before me. I started beating her to it when I was 14. He held the cup toward her. She took it. Their fingers didn't touch, but the heat of the cup passed between them like a question neither was ready to ask. "What time does the store open?" he asked. 7. "I'll help with the morning stock." "That's not necessary. Mr. Whitmore's hip is bad," Jay said simply. "I saw him favoring his right side yesterday. He shouldn't be lifting crates." Eleanor stared at him. "How did you—" "I pay attention, ma'am." She took a slow sip of coffee. It was strong, exactly how she liked it, though she hadn't told him that. "You don't have to call me ma'am," she said. "You used to call me Ellie." Something flickered in his eyes, quick and bright and immediately controlled. "That was a long time ago," he said. "It was." Another pause. The stove crackled. Morning light crept through the kitchen window. "Eleanor, then," he said quietly, "if you'll allow it." She nodded once. "Eleanor is fine." He helped with the morning stock. He lifted the heavy crates without complaint, organized shelves without being asked, and spoke politely to every customer who came through the door. Old Mrs. Garfield squinted at him over her spectacles. "You're Mary Callahan's boy?" "Yes, ma'am." "You've grown." "I have, ma'am." "Your mother made the best cornbread in this territory." Jace smiled. It was small, barely there, but it transformed his face, softened the hard lines, revealed the boy underneath the man. "She did," he said. "I still use her recipe." Mrs. Garfield patted his arm. "Welcome home, son." Eleanor watched from behind the counter. She watched the way he removed his hat for every woman who entered, the way he stepped aside for children, the way he carried a sack of flour to old Mr. Chen's wagon without being asked and refused payment with a quiet, "No, sir. Neighbors don't charge neighbors." She watched, and something inside her chest, something she'd locked away and buried and tried to forget, began to stir. She hated it. She hated it because hope was dangerous, because she'd built a life without James Callahan. A good life. A life of purpose and independence and respect. She sat on the town council. She taught children to read. She balanced her father's books and kept the store running through drought and depression and every hard year the territory could throw at her. She didn't need a man to complete her. She especially didn't need this man, this ghost from her childhood, riding in with his fine horse and his sad eyes and his quiet, steady way of making himself useful. But she couldn't stop watching. Sheriff Hale came to the store on the third day. He walked in like he owned the place, hat tilted back, badge polished, smile wide but never reaching his eyes. He was a handsome man, Eleanor would give him that. Tall, clean-shaven, well-dressed for a lawman. He'd been sheriff for 6 years, and in that time he'd kept the peace well enough. But there was something about Marcus Hale that Eleanor had never trusted, something behind the smile, something calculating. "Morning, Eleanor," he said, leaning against the counter. "Your guest settling in?" "He's helping my father," Eleanor replied, not looking up from her ledger. "Generous of him." Hale picked up an apple from the barrel, turned it in his hand. "Man rides 500 miles, moves into a lady's house, starts working her store. Makes a person wonder about his intentions." "His intentions are his own business." "See, that's where I disagree." Hale set the apple down. "A man with a reputation moves into my town, gets close to a member of my council. That's my business." Eleanor looked up. "Your town?" "Manner of speaking." "It's not your town, Marcus. It belongs to the people who built it." Hale's smile thinned. "The people who built it trust me to protect it. That's why they gave me this badge. They gave you that badge to uphold the law, not to decide who comes and goes." Something cold passed through Hale's eyes, quick, like a cloud across the sun. "I'm looking out for you, Eleanor." "I don't recall asking you to." Hale straightened. He adjusted his hat. He looked at her the way he always did, like she was something he'd already decided was his, and it was only a matter of time before she realized it. "Be careful," he said softly. "Men like Callahan, they come with promises. They leave with everything." He walked out. Eleanor stood behind the counter, her knuckles white on the edge of the ledger. She wasn't afraid of Marcus Hale, but she was beginning to understand that she should be. That night, Eleanor sat on the back porch with a cup of cold tea, listening to the crickets and staring at the sky. The back door creaked. Jace stepped out, saw her, and stopped. "Sorry, didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding." He hesitated, then sat on the opposite end of the porch step, far enough to be respectful, close enough to talk. For a while, neither of them spoke. The night was warm, thick with the smell of sage and dry earth. "Hale came by the store today," Eleanor said. Jace nodded slowly. "I know. I saw him leave." "He doesn't want you here." I figured that the moment I rode in. He's not a man who gives up easily. Neither am I. Eleanor turned to look at him. In the dim light, his face was half shadow, half moonlight. Why did you really come back, James? He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he might not answer. When I was 12, he said finally, I had nothing. No father, no money, no future anyone could see. The only good thing I had was that afternoon by the creek with you. He looked down at his hands. I built everything I have on the memory of that day. Every fence I mended, every herd I drove, every dollar I saved. I did it because I told a girl I'd come back worthy. And if I'd married? Eleanor asked. If I'd moved away? If I'd forgotten? Jace looked at her. Then I'd have come back anyway. Kept my word. Tipped my hat. And ridden on. Just like that. Just like that. A promise ain't about what you get, Eleanor. It's about who you become trying to keep it. She felt the sting behind her eyes. She blinked it back. You can't walk into a woman's life after 22 years and expect— I don't expect anything, he said gently. I'm not here to claim you. I'm not here to rescue you. You don't need rescuing. Anyone with eyes can see that. He stood. I'm here because I said I would be. What happens next is your choice. It always was. He tipped his hat, a habit so ingrained it was part of him, and went back inside. Eleanor sat alone on the porch. The cottonwood tree down by the creek was just visible in the moonlight, its branches dark against the pale sky. She pressed her hand against her chest and felt her heart beating hard and fast and terrified. Not of James Callahan, of herself. Of the woman she might become if she let those walls come down. And somewhere across town, in the sheriff's office, Marcus Hale sat behind his desk, staring at a letter from the railroad company. The letter promised money, power, expansion. All he had to do was clear the way. He looked at the map pinned to his wall. 3 properties circled in red ink. Whitmore's was one of them. Hale folded the letter carefully, placed it in his desk drawer, and locked it. Then he reached for his whiskey and drank in the dark, thinking about Eleanor Whitmore, James Callahan, and all the ways a man with a badge could make a stranger disappear. The week that followed changed Red Hollow in ways no one expected. Jace Callahan did not ask for attention. He did not seek it, but attention found him the way rivers find low ground, naturally, inevitably, and with a force that couldn't be stopped. He was at the store every morning before Eleanor came downstairs. Crates moved, shelves stocked, coffee made. He spoke little, worked hard, and treated every person who walked through the door like they mattered. And people noticed. Old Mr. Chen brought him a plate of dumplings on the 4th day. For Mary's boy, he said, pressing the plate into Jace's hands. Your mother helped my wife when no one else would. We don't forget. Jace held the plate like it was made of glass. Thank you, sir. You eat, Mr. Chen said firmly. Too thin. Your mother would scold me. Clara Hayes brought fresh bread. The pastor's wife brought preserves. Even gruff Tom Dawson from the livery stable nodded to Jace on the street, which, for Tom Dawson, was practically an embrace. But not everyone welcomed him. At the saloon, Deputy Roy Skaggs held court every evening, and his tongue was as loose as his morals. Callahan killed a man in Abilene, Skaggs told anyone who'd listen. Shot him dead in a card game. And that ranch he's so proud of? Took it from a widow, charmed her right out of her land. Billy Pruitt, the barber's son, leaned forward. That true? Sheriff says so, and the sheriff don't lie. But Martha Pike, who was sweeping near the saloon door, heard every word and carried it straight to the quilting circle. Roy Skaggs is spreading poison about that Callahan boy, Martha announced. And I'll bet my best quilt the sheriff put him up to it. Now, Martha, said Pastor William's wife gently. "Don't you now Martha me, Dorothy. I remember Mary Callahan. I remember that boy going hungry so his mother could eat. A child like that don't grow up to steal from widows." The quilting circle went quiet. Needles paused. Eyes met. Red Hollow was choosing sides. Eleanor heard the rumors. She heard them from customers, from neighbors, from the looks people gave her when she walked down Main Street. Half the town pitied her. The other half envied her. And all of them had opinions. She hated every second of it. "They're talking about me like I'm some prize at a county fair," she told her father over supper. Henry chewed slowly. "People talk. That's what people do." "They're saying I'm choosing between Hale and Callahan, like I'm standing in a store picking between two bolts of cloth." "Are you?" Eleanor's fork hit the plate. "Papa!" Henry raised his hands. "I'm asking an honest question." "No, I am not choosing between two men. I am living my life, running my store, and serving on the council. That's all I've ever done." "Fair enough." Henry reached for the salt. "But I'll say this. A woman who ain't choosing still has to deal with two men who think she is." Eleanor opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out, because her father was right. He was always right, and it was infuriating. The next morning, Jace was in the storeroom when Eleanor found him staring at the account books. "Those are private," she said. "I know. I wasn't reading them." He pointed to the shelf above. "I was reaching for the lamp oil. But Eleanor, that top ledger, the one with the red binding. What about it?" "It was open when I came in, and the numbers I saw didn't match the inventory on the shelves." Eleanor stiffened. "What do you mean?" "You've got 40 sacks of flour listed in that book. I counted this morning. There's 28. "That's impossible. I did inventory last month." 12 sacks short. And the sugar's off, too. By about 60 pounds. Eleanor pushed past him and pulled the ledger down. She ran her finger along the columns, her lips moving silently. Her face went pale. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. "These numbers were right when I checked them. Someone's changed the entries." "Who has access to this room?" Eleanor looked at him. "Me, my father, and anyone the sheriff sends to do inspections." The words hung between them like gun smoke. "Hale inspects the store?" Jace asked carefully. "Once a month. It's standard for all businesses. He checks for contraband, verifies tax records, and has access to your books." Eleanor closed the ledger. Her jaw was tight. "Don't say what you're thinking." "I'm not saying anything." "You're thinking the sheriff altered my inventory records." "I said I'm not saying anything." "Your face is saying it loud enough." Jace looked at her steadily. "Eleanor, I'm a rancher. I know what cooked books look like. Somebody's skimming, and they're using your store to hide it." She pressed the ledger against her chest like armor. "Marcus Hale is the law in this town. He's arrogant and he's possessive, but he's not a thief." "I hope you're right." "I am right." But she didn't sound sure, and they both knew it. That afternoon, Jace walked to the land office. He told Eleanor he was checking property records for his mother's old claim, a small parcel on the South Road that Mary Callahan had never formally owned. It was true. He did check those records. But while he was there, he also looked at something else. The clerk, a nervous young man named Peter Finch, watched Jace flip through the territorial register with growing unease. "Mr. Callahan, those records are public, but I'm not sure—" "Public means I can look," Jace said pleasantly. "That's what public means, isn't it, Peter?" "Yes, sir, but the sheriff usually likes to know when someone's—" "The sheriff doesn't own this office," Jace looked up. Does he? Peter swallowed. No, sir. Good. Jace found what he was looking for, 3 pages from the back. 4 properties in Red Hollow had been flagged for territorial reassessment, a legal term that meant someone was preparing to force a sale or reduce the assessed value. The Whitmore store and the land behind it was one of them. The church property was another. The old Miller homestead, now vacant, was the third. And Tom Dawson's livery stable was the fourth. All 4 properties sat along the proposed route of the Southern Pacific Spur Line. And the signature on the reassessment request belonged to Sheriff Marcus Hale. Jace closed the register quietly. He looked at Peter Finch, who was sweating through his collar. Peter, Jace said, has anyone else looked at this register recently? Just the sheriff, sir, last month. Anyone from the railroad? Peter's eyes darted to the door. 2 men came through about 6 weeks ago. Suits, Eastern accents. They met with the sheriff at his office. I don't know what about. But you can guess. Peter said nothing, which was answer enough. Jace put the register back on the shelf. Thank you, Peter. I was never here. Yes, sir, Mr. Callahan. You were never here. Jace walked back to the store with his hands in his pockets and murder in his heart. Not the killing kind, the cold, patient kind. The kind that builds a case and waits for the right moment. He'd seen this before. In Santa Fe, in Tucson, in every boomtown where the railroad came through. A lawman or a politician, or both, would buy up land cheap, through fear, fraud, or force, and sell it to the railroad at 10 times the price. The people who'd built the town, who'd sweated and bled for it, got nothing. And Marcus Hale was running the same play in Red Hollow. Jace couldn't prove it yet, but he would. He told Henry that evening, not Eleanor, Henry, because Henry Whitmore had lived long enough to hear hard truth without flinching. They sat on the back porch while Eleanor worked the store's evening accounts inside. He's after the land, Jace said quietly. Henry rocked in his chair. I suspected. You did? I'm old, son, not blind. Hale's been pressuring me for 2 years to sell the back acre. Says the town needs it for expansion. I told him no. He asked again. I told him no again. He stopped asking 6 months ago. That's when he started the reassessment. Henry nodded. And that's when he started courting my daughter. The words landed hard. Jace's hands tightened on his knees. He doesn't want Eleanor, Jace said. He wants the deed. Both, Henry said. Marry Eleanor, control the property, sell to the railroad. Clean and legal. No one even asks questions because the sheriff married the store owner's daughter. Does she know? Eleanor sees what she wants to see when it comes to people she's known a long time. She doesn't trust Hale, but she doesn't think he's capable of this. She needs to know. She needs proof, Henry corrected. My daughter doesn't run on suspicion. She runs on facts. You give her facts, she'll burn that man's world to the ground. You give her guesses, she'll throw you out of this house. Jace almost smiled. She's stubborn. She's a Whitmore. We don't bend easy. No, sir, you don't. Henry looked at him in the fading light. You care about her. It wasn't a question. I never stopped, Jace said. That's a long time to carry a feeling for someone you haven't seen. Yes, sir, it is. Henry rocked his chair slowly. Then be patient, and be smart, because Marcus Hale is neither, and that makes him dangerous. The town dance came on Saturday. Red Hollow held a dance every month in the church hall. The one social event where everyone gathered, where feuds were set aside and gossip flowed freer than the punch. Eleanor wore her blue dress, the good one. She told herself it had nothing to do with James Callahan. She told herself she wore it because she liked it, because it was clean, because it fit well. She was lying, and she knew it. The hall was packed. Lanterns hung from the rafters. A fiddler and a guitar player sat up in the corner. Children ran between legs. Old couples sat along the walls, watching and remembering. Jay stood near the door in a clean white shirt and dark vest, hat in his hands. He looked uncomfortable, not with the people, but with himself, like a man who'd spent too many years alone and had forgotten how to stand in a room full of warmth. Eleanor watched him from across the hall. She watched him shake hands with Tom Dawson. She watched him compliment Mrs. Garfield's shawl. She watched him crouch down to talk to Clara Hayes's little boy, eye to eye, man to child, like the boy's words mattered as much as anyone's. And then Sheriff Hale walked in. He came through the door like he owned every plank in the floor. New shirt, polished boots, badge gleaming. He scanned the room, found Eleanor, and walked straight toward her. "Evening, Eleanor," he offered his hand. "May I have this dance?" The room went quiet. Not silent. The fiddle still played, children still laughed. But a hush fell over the adults. Everyone watching, everyone waiting. Eleanor looked at Hale's outstretched hand. "Thank you, Marcus, but I'm not dancing tonight." Hale's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went flat. "Not dancing? You always dance." "Not tonight." "I see." Hale lowered his hand, slowly. "Perhaps your guest has worn you out, all that heavy lifting at the store." "My guest has been a gentleman, which is more than I can say for the gossip your deputy's been spreading." The hush deepened. Heads turned. Roy Skaggs, standing near the punch bowl, suddenly found his boots very interesting. Hale's jaw tightened. "I don't control what Roy says." "You control everything in this town, Marcus, or you try to." Eleanor held his gaze. "Don't pretend otherwise." For a moment, just a moment, something ugly flashed across Hale's face, raw and furious and possessive. Then it was gone, buried under that practiced smile. "Enjoy your evening, Eleanor," he said, and walked away. Jace appeared at her side 30 seconds later. He hadn't rushed, hadn't pushed through the crowd. He'd simply moved, quietly, deliberately, until he was there. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine." "You're shaking." She looked down at her hands. He was right. She pressed them against her skirt. "I'm angry," she said. "That's different." "Yes, ma'am, it is." The fiddle shifted to a slow waltz. Couples moved to the center of the floor. Jace held out his hand. Not demanding, not expecting. Just offering. Palm up, steady, patient. "You said you weren't dancing," he said. "I said I wasn't dancing with him." She took his hand. His palm was rough and warm and sure. He led her to the floor with a gentleness that surprised her. No pulling, no guiding. Just walking beside her like she was perfectly capable of getting there herself. They danced, and every person in that room watched. He held her at a proper distance. His hand on her waist was light but firm. He moved well, not fancy, not showy, just steady. "Where'd a rancher learn to waltz?" she asked. "A woman, in Tucson. She ran a boarding house, made all her tenants learn manners." "Smart woman." "Terrifying woman. She could kill a scorpion with a hymn book from 10 feet. Eleanor laughed. It came out before she could stop it, bright and real and unguarded. And Jace looked at her like she'd given him something priceless. "That's the first time you've laughed since I got here," he said. "Don't get used to it." "Too late." They danced through the waltz. When it ended, Eleanor stepped back. Her cheeks were warm, Her heart was doing something she didn't approve of. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan." "James." "Thank you, James." He nodded, released her hand, stepped back to give her space, and across the room, Sheriff Hale stood in the doorway with a glass of whiskey, watching them with eyes that could cut glass. He drained the glass in one swallow. Then he left. Nobody saw him ride out to the edge of town that night. Nobody saw him meet two men at the abandoned Miller homestead. Two men with trail dust on their coats and guns on their hips. Nobody heard what was said. But if they had, they would have heard Marcus Hale say 6 words that would change everything. "I want Callahan gone. Name your price." And if they'd stayed a moment longer, they would have heard the taller of the two men, a lean, scarred rider with a rattlesnake tattoo on his wrist, smile in the darkness and say, "McCrae gang don't come cheap, Sheriff, but we get the job done." The following Monday, Eleanor arrived at the town council meeting expecting routine business. What she got was an ambush. Hale was already seated when she walked in. So were the other 4 council members: Judge Pruitt, banker Harold Marsh, rancher Dolores Gutierrez, and shopkeeper Albert Fung. Hale stood as Eleanor entered. "Thank you for coming, Eleanor. We have an urgent matter." "What matter?" "Public safety." Hale placed a document on the table. "I'm requesting a formal inquiry into James Callahan, his background, his business dealings, his reason for being in Red Hollow." Eleanor sat down slowly. "On what grounds?" "Abilene. A man died." "Self-defense. Adjudicated." "Santa Fe. A widow lost her ranch." "A legal purchase, filed with the territory." Hale smiled. "You've done your research." "I'm thorough, Marcus. You know that." Judge Pruitt cleared his throat. "Sheriff, is there any evidence that Mr. Callahan poses a current threat?" "He discharged a firearm on Main Street." "At a rattlesnake," Eleanor said. "So he claims." "So the snake's remains confirmed. Tom Dawson cleared it away himself." Hale's smile faded. "He's living in a single woman's home." "He's living in my father's home, as a guest, in a separate room, under the same roof as a 68-year-old chaperone." Dolores Gutierrez pressed her lips together to hide a smile. Albert Fung studied the ceiling. Harold Marsh, the banker, shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should table this." "I second that motion," Eleanor said firmly. Judge Pruitt nodded. "Tabled. Unless the sheriff presents actual evidence of criminal intent, this council has no jurisdiction over a man's right to visit a town." Hale sat back in his chair. His face was calm. His knuckles were white. "Of course, Judge," he said. "I was simply looking out for the community." "We appreciate your diligence, Sheriff," Pruitt said, in a tone that suggested he appreciated no such thing. Eleanor left the meeting with her hands clenched at her sides. She found Jace at the store, repairing a broken shelf hinge. He looked up when she walked in. One glance at her face told him everything. "What happened?" "Hale tried to get the council to investigate you. Formally." Jace set down the screwdriver. "On what charge?" "Being here. Being alive. Being inconvenient." She threw her hat on the counter. "I shut it down, but he's not going to stop." "No, he's not." "James," she turned to face him, "what is he really doing? What's behind this?" Jace looked at her for a long moment. He thought about what Henry had said. She needs proof, not guesses. But she also needed to be warned. "Sit down," he said. "I don't want to sit. Eleanor, please." She sat. He told her about the land office, the reassessment filings, the railroad surveyors, The 4 properties flagged, including hers. He watched her face change as he spoke, watched the anger drain away, and something colder take its place. Something harder. Something that looked like the woman who'd survived 22 years on her own and wasn't about to lose everything to a man with a badge and a scheme. "He's going to steal our land," she said, not a question. "He's going to make it legal. Force reassessment, drive the value down, buy it cheap or scare people into selling, then flip it to the railroad. And marrying me gives him the Whitmore property without a fight." Eleanor stood. She walked to the window. She stood there for a long time with her arms crossed and her back straight. "That man has sat in my father's kitchen," she said quietly. "He's eaten at our table. He's brought flowers to my door and called it courting." "I know." "And the whole time, he was calculating the price of our land." "Yes." She turned from the window. Her eyes were dry, fierce, burning with a fury that had nothing to do with tears. "I need those records. I need copies. I need evidence the council can't ignore." "I'll get them." "We'll get them," she corrected. "This is my town too, and nobody, not Marcus Hale, not the railroad, not anyone, is going to take it from the people who built it." Jace looked at her. This woman who balanced ledgers and sat on councils and taught children to read and had just discovered the man pursuing her wanted her property more than her heart. She wasn't broken. She was furious. And fury, in a woman like Eleanor Whitmore, was something Marcus Hale had never planned for. That night, after Henry had gone to bed, Jace sat at the kitchen table cleaning his revolver. It was a Colt, well-maintained, worn at the grip from years of use. He didn't carry it in town. He kept it in his room, under the bed, within reach. Eleanor came downstairs for water and stopped when she saw the gun. "You expecting trouble?" "I'm always expecting trouble," Jace said. "Hoping for the best, preparing for the worst." She sat across from him. "Tell me about Abilene." He didn't look up. "A man accused me of cheating at cards. I wasn't. He drew. I was faster." "Did you want to kill him?" "No, but I wanted to live more than I wanted to spare him." "And Santa Fe?" "A woman named Clara Reeves. Her husband died. Left her a ranch she couldn't run. She came to me, not the other way around. I paid fair price. Helped her relocate to Tucson. She writes me letters at Christmas." "Hale makes it sound different." "Hale makes everything sound the way he needs it to." Eleanor watched him work. His hands were steady, methodical. The same hands that lifted crates and danced a waltz and held a coffee cup like a peace offering every morning. "You've killed a man," she said, "and you're sitting in my kitchen cleaning a gun. I should be afraid of you." "Are you?" She looked at him, really looked at him, at the scars on his knuckles, at the line between his brows that came from years of squinting into hard sun, at the gray eyes that held shadows and warmth in equal measure. "No," she said, "and that scares me more than anything." He set the gun down, looked at her across the table. "You don't have to trust me, Eleanor. You just have to let me help you protect what's yours." "And if protecting what's mine means standing against the sheriff?" "Then I'll stand with you." "Even if it costs you?" "It already has. Being here, in this town, with you, it's already cost me more than you know." His voice dropped. "Because leaving again would be the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've done some hard things." She reached across the table, not to touch him, not yet, but close. Her fingertips rested inches from his. "Don't leave," she said quietly. "I won't." Promise me." He met her eyes. "I promise." And this time, she believed him. 3 days later, the McRae gang hit the supply wagon coming up from Tucson. They took everything: flour, sugar, ammunition, medicine. The driver crawled into town at town with a broken arm and a message carved into the wagon seat with a knife. "Red Hollow pays, or Red Hollow burns." And Marcus Hale stood on Main Street, badge gleaming in the morning sun, and told the terrified townspeople exactly what they wanted to hear. "Don't worry, your sheriff will protect you." But Jace Callahan stood in the doorway of Whitmore's store, arms crossed, watching Hale's performance with the cold, knowing eyes of a man who'd seen this play before. The fox was guarding the henhouse, and the fox had just invited the wolves. 3 days after the supply wagon attack, Red Hollow was a town holding its breath. People locked their doors before sundown. Mothers kept children close. Men who hadn't touched a rifle in years pulled them down from mantles and checked the loads with shaking hands. And Sheriff Marcus Hale fed every ounce of that fear. He posted deputies at both ends of Main Street. He ordered a curfew after dark. He called a town meeting and stood at the front of the church hall with his thumbs hooked in his belt and his voice pitched low and steady. The voice of a man who wanted to sound like salvation. "The McRae gang is out there," Hale told the packed room. "They hit our supply wagon. They carved a threat into the wood. These are not men who bluff." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Garfield clutched her shawl. Tom Dawson gripped the back of a pew until his knuckles went white. "I've sent word to the territorial marshal," Hale continued. "But until he arrives, this town is under my protection. I need cooperation. I need trust. And I need every man, woman, and child to stay off the streets after dark." He paused. Let the silence do its work. "We will get through this. Together." Applause. Nervous, grateful, desperate applause. Eleanor sat in the third row and did not clap. She watched Hale soak in the applause like a man drinking water after a long ride. She watched his eyes scan the room, not for threats, but for doubt, checking who believed him, cataloging who didn't. His gaze found her, held. She didn't look away. After the meeting, Jace was waiting outside the church. He leaned against the hitching post, arms crossed, hat low. "He's good," Jace said as Eleanor approached. "He's terrifying." "Same thing sometimes." Jace fell into step beside her. "He sent word to the territorial marshal?" "He says he did." "You believe him?" "I believe he wrote a letter. Whether he sent it is another question." They walked in silence for a moment. The street was empty. Curfew had already driven everyone indoors. "The McRae gang doesn't operate this far west," Jace said quietly. "Their territory is east of Tucson. Always has been." Eleanor slowed. "How do you know that?" "Because I've run cattle through that territory for 8 years. I know which gangs work which roads. McRae runs the Tucson to El Paso corridor. He doesn't come north unless someone pays him to." Eleanor stopped walking. "You're saying Hale brought them here." "I'm saying they didn't come on their own." "That's an accusation, James, a serious one." "I know what it is. You'd need proof." "I'm working on it." She studied his face. "What are you planning?" "Tonight, after dark, I'm riding out to the Miller homestead." "That's outside town limits. That's where Hale met those men the night of the dance. Tom Dawson told me he saw 3 horses tied behind the old barn. 2 he didn't recognize. 1 was the sheriff's paint mare." Eleanor grabbed his arm. Her fingers dug into his sleeve. If Hale catches you out there, he won't. If the McRae gang is camped nearby, then I'll know exactly where they are and how many there are, which is more than Hale wants anyone to know. James, her voice dropped. Don't do this. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then at her face. I have to. Why? Because your father's name is on those reassessment papers. Because this store, this land, everything your family built, it's all on Hale's list. And those outlaws aren't here to rob Red Hollow. They're here to scare it into selling. Eleanor's grip tightened, then released. Come back, she said. I will. That's a promise, James Callahan. Yes, ma'am, it is. He rode out at midnight. The Miller homestead sat 2 miles north of town, where the road bent toward the foothills. It had been empty since old Jacob Miller died 3 winters back. No heirs, no buyers, just a sagging barn and a house with broken windows. Jace left his horse in a dry creek bed a 1/4 mile out and went the rest of the way on foot. He moved the way years of ranch work and hard living had taught him. Slow, low, listening more than looking. He heard them before he saw them. Voices, low and rough, the clink of bottles, the snort of horses. He counted 5 horses tied behind the barn, 5 men at least, maybe more inside. He crept closer. Through a gap in the barn wall, he saw them. 5 men around a makeshift table, cards, whiskey, guns laid out within easy reach. The tallest one had a rattlesnake tattoo on his wrist. That would be McRae himself, or his second. The others were hard-faced, trail-worn, the kind of men who'd kill for money and sleep sound after. One of them was talking. Sheriff says we hit the bank Tuesday night, same time the whole town's at the prayer meeting Hale's been pushing. What about the store? The Whitmore place? That's the real target. Sheriff wants the records in the back room destroyed. Fire. Make it look like the gang did it during the raid. And the old man? A pause. A shrug. Accidents happen in fires. Jace's blood went cold. Not just the land. Not just the store. Henry. They were talking about Henry. His hand went to his revolver. Every instinct screamed at him to kick through that wall and start shooting. 5 against 1. Bad odds. Suicide odds. But he'd promised Eleanor he'd come back. He forced his hand away from the gun, forced his breathing steady, forced himself to listen. What about the Callahan fella? The one staying with the Whitmores? Sheriff wants him dealt with first, before Tuesday. Make it look like he skipped town, or like the gang got him on the road. That's extra. Sheriff's paying extra. Jace had heard enough. He backed away from the barn, step by careful step, until the voices faded. Then he moved fast, not running, but covering ground with the long, sure stride of a man who knew that every minute counted. He reached his horse, mounted, rode hard for Red Hollow. He didn't go to the store. He went to Tom Dawson's livery. Tom answered the door in his nightshirt with a shotgun in his hands. Callahan? What the hell? Tom, I need you to listen. I need you to listen and not talk until I'm done. Tom looked at Jace's face and lowered the shotgun. Come in. Jace told him everything. The land office records, the reassessment filings, the railroad deal, Hale's meetings with the McRae gang, and what he'd just heard at the Miller homestead. Tom sat in his kitchen chair and aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He's going to burn the Whitmore store, Tom said, with Henry inside, and blame it on the gang, and marry Eleanor after, with nobody left to fight him. Tom rubbed his face with both hands. Good God, Callahan. Do you know what you're asking? You're asking this town to turn against its own sheriff. I'm asking this town to survive. On the word of a man who's been here 2 weeks? On the evidence in the land office. On the 5 armed men camped at Miller's place. On the carved threat in that wagon seat. A threat Hale knew about before anyone else, because he ordered it. Tom went quiet. The clock on his wall ticked in the silence. Who else knows? Tom asked. Henry, Eleanor, now you. That ain't enough. It will be. But I need help. I need men who can handle a gun and who won't fold when Hale pushes back. Tom looked at him. I know 4, maybe 5, good men, quiet men, men who've been suspicious of Hale longer than you've been in town. Can you get them together? Tomorrow, before Tuesday. I can try. Don't try, Tom. Do it. Because if we're not ready when that gang rides in, people are going to die. Starting with Henry Whitmore. Tom stood, held out his hand. Jace shook it. I'll have them at my stable tomorrow night, Tom said. After curfew. After curfew. Callahan, if you're wrong about this, we're all finished. If I'm right about this, we're finished anyway, unless we fight. Jace rode back to the Whitmore house and found Eleanor waiting on the back porch. She stood when she heard his horse. You're alive, she said. I'm alive. What did you find? He dismounted and tied the horse. He walked up the porch steps and stood in front of her, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Because the words he had to say would change everything, and there was no way to say them gently. James, what did you find? They're planning to hit the bank and the store Tuesday night, during the prayer meeting Hale organized. Eleanor's face went still. The store? They're going to burn it, destroy the records in the back room. And Hale gave orders about your father. What orders? Jace couldn't say it. His throat closed around the words. What orders, James? They said, accidents happen in fires. Eleanor didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She stood perfectly still, and something shifted behind her eyes. Something ancient and fierce and absolutely terrifying. He wants to kill my father, she said. Yes. For land. Yes. For money. Yes. She turned and walked into the house. Jace followed her to the kitchen, where she pulled open the cabinet beneath the sink and retrieved a wooden box. Inside was a Smith & Wesson revolver, small, well-oiled, loaded. My mother's, Eleanor said. Papa taught me to shoot when I was 14. Eleanor, nobody touches my father. Her voice was iron. Nobody burns my store. And nobody, not Marcus Hale, not the McCrae gang, not the devil himself, takes this town from the people who built it. She looked at Jace with eyes that could have set the whole Arizona territory on fire. Tell me the plan. They worked through the night. Jace, Eleanor, and Henry, the old man refusing to be left out despite his bad hip. I've survived drought, influenza, and a Comanche raid in '61, Henry said. I'll survive one crooked sheriff. By dawn, they had a plan. By Monday night, Tom Dawson had gathered 6 men in his livery stable, ranchers and storekeepers who'd lived in Red Hollow long enough to know something was rotten and brave enough to act. Jace stood before them in the lamplight and told them what was coming. Silence. Heavy, disbelieving, terrified silence. Then Dolores Gutierrez, the rancher from the council, spoke from the back. Nobody had expected her. She'd come uninvited, carrying her dead husband's Winchester like she'd been born with it. My ranch is on that list too, she said. I say we fight. One by one, the others nodded. Tom Dawson, Albert Fung, old Mr. Chen, who produced a shotgun older than most of the men in the room. Billy Pruitt, the barber's son, with shaking hands but steady eyes. And Pastor Williams, who carried no gun, but said he'd stand witness before God and the territorial court. "Tuesday night," Jace said. "The prayer meeting starts at 8. That's when they'll expect the streets to be empty."
"We won't be at the prayer meeting. We'll be here and at the store and at every position between the bank and Main Street."
"What about the sheriff?" Tom asked.
"Hale will make himself scarce. He'll have an alibi, probably at the prayer meeting himself. He'll show up after the shooting stops, looking shocked and heroic."
"So we need him to not show up after," Dolores said. "We need him to show up during," Eleanor said from the doorway. Every head turned. She walked in, her mother's revolver holstered at her hip. "If Hale isn't here when his gang attacks, he can deny everything. He'll say we imagined it. He'll say we're the criminals. But if we can force him to be present, if we can make him show his hand, he'll hang himself," Henry finished from behind her. Jace looked at Eleanor. She looked at him. "I know how to draw him out," she said. "How?" "I'll tell him I'm ready to discuss selling the back acre. Tomorrow afternoon, I'll say my father's health is failing, and I want security. I'll ask him to come to the store Tuesday evening, before the prayer meeting, to discuss terms. He'll be suspicious. He'll be greedy. Greed always wins, James. You know that." She was right. And he hated that she was right, because it meant putting her directly in Hale's path. "I'll be there," Jace said. "No, you'll be outside. If he sees you, he won't talk. He needs to think I'm alone. He needs to think he's won." "Eleanor, I am not letting you—" "You're not letting me do anything." Her voice cut like a blade. "I'm choosing. That's always been the difference." Jace closed his mouth, looked at Henry. The old man shrugged. "She's a Whitmore," Henry said simply. Tuesday came like a held breath finally released. The day was brutal. Heat shimmered off every surface. Dogs lay in whatever shade they could find. The streets were empty by noon, partly from the heat, partly from fear. Eleanor sent word to Hale at midday. A simple note, hand-delivered by Billy Pruitt. "Marcus, I'd like to discuss the property matter. Come to the store at 7, before the meeting. Come alone. E.W." Hale's reply came within the hour. "I'll be there." At 6 o'clock, Jace positioned his men. Tom Dawson and Albert Fung behind the feed store, covering the north end of Main Street. Dolores Gutierrez and Mr. Chen on the roof of the livery, with clear sightlines to the bank. Billy Pruitt at the church bell tower. If he saw riders coming, he'd ring the bell. 3 long rings. That was the signal. Henry Whitmore sat in the back room of the store with a loaded shotgun across his knees and the account books locked in the strongbox behind him. "If anyone gets past Eleanor and Jace," Henry said, "they still have to get past me, and I don't miss." Jace stood in the alley beside the store, close enough to hear everything through the thin wall, close enough to be inside in 3 seconds. He checked his Colt. Loaded. 6 rounds. He prayed he wouldn't need them. At 7 o'clock, Hale walked through the front door of Whitmore General Store. Eleanor stood behind the counter. The lamp was lit. The door was open. She wore a simple dress and no weapon visible. The revolver was under the counter, within reach. "Marcus," she said, "thank you for coming." Hale removed his hat. He looked around the store, checking for Jace, checking for Henry, checking for anything wrong. He saw nothing. The store was empty. Just Eleanor, alone, with a tired expression and ink-stained fingers. "You said you wanted to discuss the property," Hale said. "I did. Sit down." He sat on the stool across the counter. She poured 2 glasses of water. "My father's health is declining," Eleanor said. "His hip is worse. Some mornings he can barely walk.
I'm sorry to hear that.
The store is too much for one person. And with these outlaws threatening the town, Marcus, I'm scared.
She said it softly, vulnerably, and she watched the hunger light up in Hale's eyes like a match striking. You should be scared, Hale said, leaning forward. The McRae gang doesn't make idle threats. But I can protect you, Eleanor. I've always wanted to protect you.
I know.
If you'd let me.
The back acre, Eleanor said. That's what you've always wanted to discuss. The land behind the store.
It's valuable land, with the railroad coming.
He stopped, caught himself, but not fast enough. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. With the railroad coming? Hale's face went carefully blank. Rumors. The territory's full of railroad rumors. Funny, because I checked the land office records, Marcus, and I found 4 properties flagged for reassessment, all along the proposed rail spur route, all filed by you. The air in the store changed, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees in a heartbeat. Hale's hand moved to his belt. Not his gun, not yet, but close.
You've been busy, he said.
I'm a council member. It's my job.
Your job is to mind the store and let the law handle legal matters.
The law? Eleanor's voice hardened. You mean the law that invited the McRae gang to Red Hollow? The law that's planning to burn this store tonight and blame it on outlaws? Hale stood. The stool scraped back. His hand was on his holster now. Be very careful, Eleanor. Be very careful yourself, Marcus, because every word you've said tonight has been heard. Hale's eyes went wide. He spun toward the door. James Callahan stood in the doorway. Behind him, Tom Dawson, Dolores Gutierrez, Pastor Williams, and Judge Pruitt, who'd been waiting in the storeroom, who'd heard everything through the thin wall, and whose face was the color of cold ash. Sheriff Hale, Judge Pruitt said, I think you'd better... The church bell rang. 3 long, desperate peals that split the night like a scream. Billy Pruitt's signal. Riders. Coming fast. Hale's face twisted, rage and calculation warring behind his eyes. He looked at Eleanor, at Jace, at the judge. Then he drew his gun. Jace moved faster. He shoved Eleanor behind the counter, drew his Colt, and fired. Not at Hale, but at the lamp. The store plunged into darkness. Hale's shot went wild, shattering a jar of preserves. Jace threw himself sideways. Eleanor, stay down! I'm down! I'm also armed! A second shot from Hale. This one punching through the wall 2 inches from Jace's head. Then bootsteps. The back door crashing open. Hale was running. He's heading for the alley, Tom shouted. Let him go, Jace yelled. The gang is here! Positions! They didn't have time to chase the sheriff. The thunder of hooves was already shaking Main Street. Gunshots cracked through the night. Glass shattered somewhere north. The bank. Jace grabbed Eleanor's arm in the darkness. Where's your father? Back room. Armed. Stay with him. Barricade the door.
James. Eleanor. His hand found her face in the dark. His palm against her cheek, rough and warm and shaking. Stay alive. That's all I need from you. Stay alive. She pressed her hand over his. 1 second. 2. Then she pulled away and ran for the back room. Jace stepped out onto Main Street and into hell. 5 riders, maybe 6, tearing through town. Gunfire from every direction, muzzle flashes in the dark like angry stars. The bank windows were shattered. A fire had started somewhere. He could smell the smoke, thick and acrid.
Tom Dawson was behind the water trough, firing steady. Albert Fung had taken cover behind a wagon. Dolores Gutierrez, God bless that woman, was on the livery roof, working the Winchester with a calm that would have shamed a cavalry soldier. "Jace!" Tom shouted. "Two of them heading for the store!" Jace saw them. Two riders peeling off from the main group, angling toward Whitmore's. One carried a torch. He stepped into the street. "Hey!" he shouted. The first rider turned. Jace fired. The man's gun spun out of his hand, and he clutched his wrist, screaming. The second rider, the one with the torch, kept coming. Jace fired again. The torch flew from the man's grip and landed in the dirt. The rider cursed, wheeled his horse, and charged straight at Jace. Jace stood his ground, waited, counted heartbeats. At 20 feet, he fired. The horse veered. The rider slumped and fell. Jace didn't check if he was dead. He kicked the torch into the water trough and ran for cover as bullets chewed the ground behind him. The fight lasted 11 minutes. It felt like 11 years. When it was over, 3 outlaws lay in the dust. 2 were wounded and surrendering, hands up, guns thrown away. One had fled into the darkness, the tall one, the one with the rattlesnake tattoo. McRae himself, or close enough. And one townsman was hurt. Mr. Chen had taken a bullet in the shoulder. He sat against the livery wall, pressing his hand to the wound, his ancient shotgun still smoking beside him. "Through and through," Mr. Chen said calmly when Eleanor ran to him with bandages. "I've had worse from a falling horse." Billy Pruitt came down from the bell tower, white-faced and trembling. "I rang the bell," he said, over and over. "I rang the bell." "You did good, son," Tom told him. "You did real good." The fire at the bank was small, contained to the front porch. A bucket brigade formed without being asked. Hands passed water. The fire died. And then someone asked the question everyone was thinking. "Where's the sheriff?" Silence. Jace holstered his Colt. He looked down Main Street, into the darkness beyond the last building, where the South Road led out of Red Hollow and into the desert. "Gone," he said. Eleanor appeared beside him, soot on her face, her mother's revolver in her hand, her father behind her, leaning on his cane, alive and whole and fierce as ever. "He ran," Eleanor said, not a question. "He ran." She looked at the captured outlaws being tied to the hitching post. She looked at the smoking bank. She looked at her store, still standing, walls scorched but intact, the torch extinguished before it could do its work. Then she looked at the people of Red Hollow emerging from their homes, from behind barrels and wagons and locked doors. Frightened faces, confused faces, faces slowly understanding that the man with the badge had been the real enemy all along. Dolores climbed down from the livery roof, the Winchester over her shoulder. "Someone better explain to these people what just happened." Eleanor stepped forward. Not Jace, not the judge. Eleanor. She stood in the middle of Main Street, with soot on her dress and a gun on her hip, and she looked at her neighbors, these people she'd grown up with, served on the council with, taught their children, and balanced their accounts and fought for their future. "Sheriff Hale is gone," she said. Her voice carried clear and strong through the smoky air. "He brought these outlaws here. He planned to burn this town to drive down land prices and sell to the railroad. And tonight, he ran like the coward he's always been." Murmurs, gasps, a woman crying softly. "But we're still here," Eleanor said. "Every one of us. Still standing, still breathing, still together." She holstered her revolver. "And tomorrow, we're going to fix what's broken, the way we always have, together." Nobody applauded. Nobody cheered. But one by one, they nodded. Martha Pike, Mrs. Garfield, Pastor Williams, Tom Dawson, Billy Pruitt with his shaking hands. Red Hollow was battered, but Red Hollow was alive.
And in the lamplight, standing at the edge of the crowd with blood on his knuckles and dust on his coat, James Callahan watched Eleanor Whitmore hold her town together with nothing but her voice and her spine, and the fierce, unbreakable will of a woman who refused to be anyone's prize. He'd come back to keep a promise. She'd kept one too, a promise to herself, made long before he'd ever carved initials in a tree. The promise that she would never be small, never be silent, never let any man decide her worth. And tonight, that promise had saved them all. The sun rose over Red Hollow the next morning, and the town looked like it had been through a war. Bullet holes pocked the front of the bank. The porch was black with char. 3 windows on Main Street were shattered. A wagon lay overturned near the feed store, its wheels splintered like a broken bone. But the people were moving, already moving. Before the light was fully up, Martha Pike was sweeping glass from her boardwalk. Tom Dawson was hauling water. Clara Hayes was boiling coffee in a pot big enough to serve the whole street, and she set it on a table outside her door with a handwritten sign that said, "Free. Drink up. We earned it." Eleanor hadn't slept. She'd spent the night at Mr. Chen's bedside, while the doctor, old Doc Harlan, pulled from his bed at midnight with whiskey on his breath and surprisingly steady hands, cleaned and stitched the shoulder wound. "Bullet went clean through," Doc Harlan said. "Missed the bone, missed the artery. Either God was watching, or Mr. Chen is too stubborn to die." "Both," Mr. Chen said from the bed. "And don't touch my shotgun. I'm not done with it." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "You rest." "I'll rest when the sheriff is in chains." She left Doc Harlan's at dawn and walked straight to the store. Jace was already there. Of course he was. He'd boarded up the broken front window, swept the glass, and set a lantern on the counter where the shattered one had been. He looked up when she walked in. His knuckles were wrapped in cloth. His face was drawn. He hadn't slept either. "Chen?" he asked. "He'll live. He's already asking for his gun back." The ghost of a smile, then gone. "Eleanor, we need to talk about Hale." "I know." "He ran south, on foot. His horse was still at the livery when I checked. He won't get far in this heat without a mount, but he knows this territory." "You think he'll come back?" Jace paused. That pause told her everything. "I think a man like Hale doesn't run forever," he said carefully. "He runs until he finds leverage. Then he comes back swinging." "What leverage does he have left? The whole town knows what he did." "The whole town heard you say what he did. That's not the same as proof in a courtroom." "The captured outlaws can testify, but outlaw's word against a lawman's? A good lawyer would tear that apart in an hour." Eleanor sat on the stool behind the counter. Fatigue hit her all at once, heavy and bone-deep. She pressed her palms against her eyes. "The land office records," she said. "That's a start. But the reassessment filings alone don't prove conspiracy. They prove ambition. Hale could say he was acting in the town's interest. The letter from the railroad. You said he had correspondence. In his desk, at the sheriff's office, which is locked." Eleanor dropped her hands. "Then we open it." "Breaking into the sheriff's office. It's not the sheriff's office anymore. He abandoned his post. He fled during an attack he orchestrated. That badge means nothing now." She stood. "Judge Pruitt can authorize a search. He heard Hale admit to the railroad scheme himself." "Pruitt's shaken. I saw him last night.
He looked like a man whose world just cracked in half.
Good. A shaken judge is an honest judge, one who's tired of looking the other way. Jace looked at her, really looked at her. The soot still in her hair, the circles under her eyes, the absolute steel in her voice. "You're something, Eleanor Whitmore." "I'm tired and I'm angry. That's a dangerous combination in a Whitmore woman." "I believe that." They went to Judge Pruitt together. The judge was at his home, sitting in his parlor with a cold cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He looked old, older than his years, like a man carrying a weight he'd been ignoring for too long. "Judge," Eleanor said, "we need to search the sheriff's office." Pruitt rubbed his temples. "On what authority?" "Yours. You're the ranking judicial officer in this territory until the marshal arrives." "If the marshal arrives. We still don't know if Hale sent that letter." "Then we send our own. But first, we need what's in that desk." Pruitt looked up at her, then at Jace, then back at her. "I heard him, Eleanor, last night, through that wall. I heard him talk about the railroad, about the land, about—" His voice broke. "I appointed that man. I recommended him for the badge. I vouched for him before the territorial governor." "That's not your shame, Judge. It's his." "I should have seen it." "You're seeing it now. That's what matters." Pruitt was quiet for a long time. Then he stood, straightened his coat, and reached for his hat. "Let's go." The sheriff's office was unlocked. Hale had left in such a hurry that the back door was still open, swinging in the morning breeze. Eleanor, Jace, Judge Pruitt, and Tom Dawson entered together. Tom stood guard at the front. Jace and Eleanor went straight to the desk. The drawer was locked. Jace looked at Eleanor. She picked up the iron paperweight from the desk and brought it down on the lock. Once. Twice. The wood splintered. The drawer slid open. Inside, 3 letters from the Southern Pacific Railroad Company. A map of Red Hollow with 4 properties circled in red. A ledger of payments, dates, amounts, initials. And at the bottom, a folded piece of paper with a single sentence written in Hale's hand. "McRae, $500 now, $500 after. Make it look real." Eleanor held the paper up. Her hand was steady. "This is his handwriting," she said. "I've seen it on every official document he signed for 6 years." Pruitt took the paper, read it. His face went gray. "That's a conspiracy to commit arson and murder," the judge said quietly. "Written in his own hand." "Paid for with railroad money," Jace added, pointing to the ledger. "Look, $500 withdrawn from the county fund 2 weeks ago. Same amount. He didn't even use his own money. He used the town's." Tom Dawson swore softly from the doorway. "He robbed us to pay for our own destruction." "He did worse than that," Eleanor said. She pointed to the map. "These 4 properties, ours, Dolores's ranch, the Miller homestead, the church land. He's been planning this for over a year. The reassessments started 14 months ago. While he was bringing me flowers," she added, and her voice went so cold that every man in the room felt it. Pruitt gathered the documents carefully. "I'll draft a formal warrant for Hale's arrest. I'll send word to the territorial marshal in Prescott myself, not through Hale's channels. And I'll call a public hearing for tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Eleanor repeated. "Not next week. Not when it's convenient. Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Pruitt confirmed. "This town deserves the truth. All of it." They stepped out of the sheriff's office and into the morning sun. A small crowd had gathered. Word traveled fast in Red Hollow, faster than any telegraph. People stood in clusters, watching, waiting, whispering. Eleanor looked at Jace.
He nodded. She turned to the crowd. Tomorrow morning, Town Square, 10 o'clock.
Everything you need to know about what happened and why. Then she walked back to her store, because there was work to do, and she'd be damned if she let Marcus Hale steal one more hour of her life. The hearing was held in the open air because the church hall couldn't hold everyone who came. Every man, woman, and child in Red Hollow turned out. They stood in the square, sat on benches, leaned against posts. Children perched on their father's shoulders. Old Mrs. Garfield brought her own chair and planted it in the front row, like she was settling in for the most important sermon of her life. Judge Pruitt stood on the steps of the land office with the documents spread on a table before him. He spoke clearly and without emotion, laying out the evidence piece by piece. The railroad letters, the reassessment filings, the payment ledger, the handwritten note to McRae. The testimony of the captured outlaws, who'd been persuaded to talk by the very simple argument that cooperation might save them from a hanging. One of the outlaws, a young, scared kid named Denny Walsh, who couldn't have been more than 19, told the crowd everything. "Sheriff came to us 6 weeks ago," Walsh said, his wrists bound, his voice shaking. "Said he needed a show of force. Said we should hit the supply wagon first, scare the town, then come back Tuesday for the real job." "What was the real job?" Pruitt asked.
"Hit the bank, burn the Whitmore store, make it look like a raid."
Walsh swallowed.
"He said the old man didn't matter. Said if he got caught inside, it'd save everyone trouble."
A sound went through the crowd. Not a gasp, something deeper, something wounded. The sound of a community realizing how close they'd come to losing one of their own to a man they'd trusted. Henry Whitmore sat in the front row, straight-backed and stone-faced. He didn't flinch when Walsh spoke about him. He didn't flinch because Henry Whitmore had spent 68 years not flinching, and he wasn't about to start now. But Eleanor, standing beside her father, put her hand on his shoulder, and Henry reached up and covered it with his own. The crowd saw that, and something shifted. This wasn't just about corruption or land deals or railroad money. This was about a man who'd tried to murder a 68-year-old shopkeeper for profit. A man who'd worn a badge and a smile and sat at kitchen tables and pretended to be a neighbor while plotting to destroy everything his neighbors had built. It was personal. Dolores Gutierrez stood when the judge opened the floor. "My ranch was on that list. My husband worked that land for 30 years before he died. Hale was going to take it from me and sell it to men in suits who've never set foot in this territory." Albert Fung stood next. "My store, my family's livelihood. Flag for reassessment without my knowledge." Tom Dawson. "The livery stable. My father built it with his own hands in 1859. Hale wanted to hand it to the railroad for pocket change." One after another they stood. They spoke. Not with rage, with something quieter and more powerful. The measured, deliberate anger of people who'd been betrayed by someone they were supposed to trust. Eleanor spoke last. She stood on the land office steps and looked out at her neighbors. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Marcus Hale didn't just break the law," she said. "He broke our trust. He used this badge." She held up the badge Hale had left on his desk. "To steal from us, to frighten us, to plan violence against us. And he did it because he thought we were too small, too scattered, too afraid to fight back." She set the badge on the table. "He was wrong. This town was built by people like my father, like Dolores Gutierrez's husband, like Tom Dawson's father, like Mary Callahan, who washed our clothes and raised her son alone and never asked for charity. These are the people who built Red Hollow. Not one man with a badge. Not one railroad company. Us. She paused. I move that the council formally remove Marcus Hale from office, revoke his authority, and issue a territorial warrant for his arrest on charges of conspiracy, fraud, embezzlement of public funds, and attempted arson and murder. Seconded, Dolores said immediately. All in favor? Judge Pruitt asked. Every hand in the square went up. Every single one. Carried, Pruitt said, unanimously. And for the first time since Tuesday night, Red Hollow exhaled. The hearing ended at noon. People didn't leave. They stayed, talking, sharing food, holding each other. Martha Pike set up a table with bread and cold meat. Clara Hayes brought more coffee. Someone found a fiddle and played something soft and slow, and nobody danced, but everybody listened. Jace stayed at the edge. He'd spoken when asked, confirming what he'd found at the Miller homestead, what he'd heard through the barn wall. But he'd kept it short. This wasn't his moment. This was Red Hollow's moment. He was leaning against the livery post when Eleanor found him. She looked different. Not just tired, different. Like something had settled inside her. Some weight she'd been carrying had shifted, and she was still figuring out how to stand without it. You're hiding, she said. I'm observing. Same thing in your case. He smiled, small but real. How's your father? Holding court? Mrs. Garfield is feeding him pie and telling him he's the bravest man in the territory. He's enjoying it more than he should. He earned it. He earned it. Eleanor leaned against the post beside him. Close. Closer than she'd ever stood before. Their shoulders almost touching. James. Thank you. You don't need to thank me. I'm not thanking you for saving us. I'm thanking you for letting me save us. Most men would have tried to take over. Most men would have put me behind a locked door and handled it themselves. Jace looked at her. Most men don't know you very well. No, they don't. A long pause. The fiddle played. Children ran past. What happens now? Eleanor asked. The marshal will come. Hale will be found. He can't hide in this territory forever. The railroad will send lawyers, but with Pruitt on record and the evidence documented, they'll back off. They don't want a public scandal. I don't mean the town. I mean... She stopped, started again. I mean you. What happens with you? Jace was quiet for a long time. I have a ranch in New Mexico, he said. 800 head of cattle. Good land, good water. 40 men on my payroll. That's a lot to leave behind. It is. But you're still here. I am. Why? He turned to face her, not the half-glances they've been trading for weeks. Full and direct and unguarded. Because I spent 22 years building something I could bring back to you. And now that I'm here, I realize it was never about the ranch, or the money, or the land. It was about being the kind of man who deserved to stand next to you. Eleanor's breath caught. And I don't know if I am that man, he continued. I've killed. I've fought. I've done things I'm not proud of, and things I'd do again. But I know this. Standing here, right now, with you, this is the only place I've ever wanted to be. James, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to decide anything. I told you from the start. What happens next is your choice. It always was. She looked at him. This man with scarred knuckles and sad eyes who'd ridden 500 miles to keep a promise, who'd fought outlaws in the dark to protect her father,
who'd stood aside and let her lead when every other man in the territory would have tried to lead for her. She reached up and took his hat off his head, set it on the post. He blinked. "What are you—" She kissed him. Not soft, not tentative. She kissed him the way a woman kisses a man when she's done being careful, done being cautious, done pretending that walls keep you safe when all they really do is keep you alone. Jace went still for one heartbeat, two. Then his hand came up, gentle, so gentle, and cradled the back of her head, and he kissed her back. When they broke apart, half the town was staring. Martha Pike had her hand over her mouth. Mrs. Garfield was nodding like she'd predicted this exact moment 3 weeks ago. Tom Dawson suddenly found something very interesting about his boots. And Henry Whitmore, sitting on his bench with a plate of pie, smiled for the first time in days and said, to no one in particular, "Took him long enough." 3 days passed. The territorial marshal arrived from Prescott, a hard, quiet man named Colonel Josiah Burke, who'd been cleaning up corrupt lawmen across Arizona for a decade. Burke reviewed the evidence, interviewed the prisoners, spoke with Judge Pruitt, with Eleanor, with Jace, with every person who'd witnessed the attack or the hearing. "This is solid," Burke told Eleanor in the store. "Hale's finished. When we find him." "When?" Eleanor said. "Not if?" "When. A man on foot in this territory in July doesn't have many options. We've got riders on every road south and west. He'll turn up." Burke was right. On the 4th day, a rider came in from the South Road. Hale had been found at a way station 20 miles out, half dead from heat and thirst, trying to barter his way onto a stagecoach with a pocket watch and a handful of lies. They brought him back to Red Hollow in chains. The whole town came out, not to jeer, not to shout. They stood in silence and watched as the man who'd worn their badge was led down Main Street like any other criminal. Hale's eyes searched the crowd, found Eleanor, locked on. "You'll regret this," he said. His voice was cracked from thirst, but the venom was still there. "You think that cowboy's going to stay? You think he won't leave you the same way he left before?" Jace started forward. Eleanor put her hand on his chest. "Don't," she said quietly. "He's not worth it." Hale laughed, harsh and broken. "He's a drifter, Eleanor. A man who runs. He ran from this town at 12, and he'll run again. And when he does, you'll have nothing." Eleanor looked at Hale, not with anger, not with pity, with something that cut deeper than both. "I had nothing when you were sheriff, Marcus. Nothing but a store and a father and my own 2 hands. That was enough then. It'll be enough now." She turned her back on him, walked away, and didn't look back. Burke took Hale to the Prescott jail that afternoon. The trial would come later. Territorial court, formal charges, the full weight of the law. But for Red Hollow, it was over. That evening, Eleanor sat on the back porch. The heat was finally breaking. A breeze came down from the foothills, carrying the smell of sage and the promise of cooler days. Jace sat beside her. Same porch, same step, same respectful distance. Except this time, she closed the distance herself. She leaned her shoulder against his, and he didn't move away. "Hale said you'd leave," she said. Hale said a lot of things. He wasn't entirely wrong. About one part. She looked at him. "You do have a ranch in New Mexico, a life, a business. You can't stay here forever, sitting on my porch and stacking flour." "No, ma'am, I can't." "So what do we do?" Jace looked at the sky, at the first stars appearing above Red Hollow, like tiny, steady promises. "I reckon," he said slowly, that a man with a ranch in New Mexico and a woman with a store in Arizona have got a decision to make. And I reckon that decision ought to be made together, not by me telling you what to do, and not by you telling me. Together. Together.
She was quiet for a moment. I'm not leaving Red Hollow. This is my home. My father's here. The store is here. The council needs me. I know. But I don't want you to give up what you've built either.
I know that too.
So, how does this work?
Jace took her hand. Slowly, carefully, like he was handling something precious and breakable and worth more than everything he owned. It works however you want it to work, Eleanor. If that means I ride back and forth, if that means I find a foreman I trust and spend more time here, if that means we build something new that neither of us planned.
You'd do that? Rearrange your whole life?
I rearranged my whole life when I was 12 years old, riding out of this town on a broken wagon. Everything I've done since then has been about getting back here. He squeezed her hand. I'm not leaving again. Not unless you ask me to. She squeezed back. I'm not asking. He turned to her. She turned to him. Then I'm staying.
And in the quiet of the evening, with the breeze picking up and the stars coming out, and the sounds of a healing town drifting through the warm air, they sat together on that porch, not as the barefoot boy and the shopkeeper's daughter, but as two people who'd walked through fire and chosen each other on the other side. Henry Whitmore opened the back door, looked at them sitting shoulder to shoulder, and closed the door without a word. But through the window, Eleanor heard him chuckle, and she thought, for the first time in 22 years, that maybe promises weren't foolish after all. Maybe they were seeds. You plant them in the dirt of a hard world, and you water them with patience and pain and years of growing. And sometimes, if you're stubborn enough, brave enough, faithful enough, they bloom into something that can survive any storm. 2 weeks after Marcus Hale was taken to Prescott in chains, a letter arrived in Red Hollow that nobody expected. It was addressed to Eleanor Whitmore, official stationery, Southern Pacific Railroad Company. Eleanor opened it at the store counter, with Jace standing beside her. She read it once, read it again, then set it down and pressed her fingers against her temples. What is it? Jace asked. The railroad wants to negotiate, directly, with the town council. Negotiate what? Right of way. They still want to run the spur line through Red Hollow, but instead of going through Hale's back channels, they're offering fair market value for any property they need, plus a depot, a telegraph office, and construction jobs for local workers. Jace picked up the letter, read it, set it down. They're scared, he said. They should be. The territorial governor's office got wind of Hale's scheme. The railroad doesn't want a scandal. They want this quiet, clean, and legal. So they come hat in hand to the woman who exposed their conspiracy. They come to the town council, Eleanor corrected. I'm 1 vote out of 5. You're the reason they have to ask at all. She looked at him, tired, proud, already calculating. I need to call a council meeting. Right now? Right now. The council met that afternoon in the church hall, the first official meeting since Hale's removal. Judge Pruitt sat in as acting town authority. Dolores Gutierrez had taken Hale's empty seat, voted in by the remaining members without a single objection. Eleanor laid the railroad's offer on the table. They're offering $12 an acre for right-of-way, plus construction contracts, plus the depot. Harold Marsh, the banker, whistled low. That's 3 times what Hale was planning to sell for.
Because Hale was planning to pocket the difference, Eleanor said. The railroad was always willing to pay fair price. They just found a cheaper option through a corrupt sheriff. Albert Fung leaned forward. What about the properties on Hale's list? My store, Dolores's ranch, Tom's livery.
The right-of-way doesn't touch any of them. The proposed route runs along the south edge of town, through open land. The only private property affected is the old Miller homestead, which has no heirs. The territory can authorize that sale directly. Dolores tapped the table. So nobody loses their land. Nobody loses their land, and the town gains a rail connection, jobs, and infrastructure. What's the catch? Pruitt asked. Eleanor paused. They want an answer in 30 days, and they want to send a representative to meet with us in person. Who? A man named Charles Worthington, Vice President of Development. He'll be here next week. Marsh shifted uncomfortably. Railroad men. I don't trust them. You don't have to trust them, Eleanor said. You have to outthink them. That's what lawyers and contracts are for. We don't have a lawyer. We will. I've written to Samuel Redfield in Prescott. He represented the Yavapai ranchers in their water rights case last year. Won every point. Jace, sitting in the back row as a guest, watched Eleanor command that room and felt something expand in his chest that was beyond pride, beyond admiration. It was the bone-deep recognition that this woman didn't just belong in that chair. She made the chair matter. After the meeting, Jace walked Eleanor back to the store. They moved through the late afternoon heat, side by side, the way they'd grown accustomed to. Close but not touching, connected by something stronger than hands. You already had the lawyer lined up, Jace said, before the meeting. I wrote to Redfield 3 days ago, before the railroad's letter arrived. Eleanor glanced at him. I knew they'd come. A company that size doesn't abandon a route. They just find a new way in. You planned for this. I planned for everything, James. That's what I do. He shook his head slowly. And people wonder why you're not married. People assume it's because no one asked. She stopped walking, turned to face him. The truth is, no one was worth saying yes to. The words hung between them, direct, unadorned, unmistakable. Jace held her gaze. And now? Now I've got a railroad to negotiate with, a store to rebuild, a town council to run, and a father who thinks you hung the moon. She paused. So I'm a little busy for grand romantic declarations. Fair enough. But James? Yes, ma'am. Ask me again when the railroad deal is signed. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. Yes, ma'am. She walked into the store. He stood on the boardwalk and let the Arizona sun cook the smile right off his face, because he couldn't stop it from coming. Charles Worthington arrived the following Tuesday on the noon stage. He was everything Eleanor expected. Polished boots, Eastern suit, soft hands, and the smile so practiced it could have been painted on. He carried a leather portfolio and spoke with the careful precision of a man who measured every word for its profit value. Eleanor met him at the stage depot, alone, by design. Miss Whitmore, Worthington said, extending his hand. A pleasure. I've heard a great deal about you. I doubt any of it was accurate, Mr. Worthington. Welcome to Red Hollow. She gave him the tour herself. The store, the bank with its scorched porch, the square where the hearing had been held. She introduced him to the council members. She let him buy lunch at the boarding house. She smiled politely and answered his questions, and gave him absolutely nothing he could use. Worthington was good. She'd given that. He asked about the town's needs, its growth plans, its concerns about the railroad. He listened.
He nodded. He expressed sympathy about the unfortunate business with your former sheriff, in a way that very carefully avoided any mention of the railroad's role in that business. Over lunch, he made his pitch. $12 an acre is generous, Miss Whitmore. The territorial average is 8. The territorial average doesn't account for the strategic value of this route. Your engineers surveyed 3 alternatives. This one saves you 40 miles and 2 mountain crossings. That's worth considerably more than $12 an acre. Worthington's smile flickered, just barely. You've done your homework. I had good teachers. She set down her fork. Mr. Worthington, let me save us both some time. The council will grant right of way. We want the depot. We want the telegraph. We want the jobs. But we want $18 an acre, a written guarantee of local hiring, and the clause that gives the town first refusal on any future expansion within 5 miles of the depot. That's quite a list. That's quite a railroad. Worthington studied her. She could see him recalculating, not just the numbers, but the woman, adjusting his assumptions, realizing that the small-town storekeeper he'd expected to charm into compliance was something else entirely. I'll need to consult with my superiors. Of course. You have 30 days from the date of your original letter. That gives you 22. You're counting. I'm always counting, Mr. Worthington. It's what I do. He left that afternoon on the return stage, portfolio tucked under his arm, practiced smile noticeably thinner than when he'd arrived. Jace was waiting at the store when Eleanor returned. He was sorting nails into bins, a task so mundane it was almost funny, given what he'd done 2 weeks ago on that same street. How'd it go? He asked, without looking up. He offered 12. I asked for 18. He'll come back at 15. I'll settle at 16 with the hiring clause. That's what I wanted from the start. Jace looked up. You asked for 18 knowing you'd take 16. First rule of negotiating. Never start where you want to finish. Where'd you learn that? My father. She picked up a handful of nails and started sorting alongside him. He used to say, always let the other man think he won something. A man who feels he's lost everything has nothing left to lose. A man who feels he's won a little will sign on the dotted line and shake your hand. Henry Whitmore is a wise man. He's the wisest man I know, she paused, present company included. I never claimed to be wise. No, you claim to be a man worth marrying. That's different. He set down the nails. She set down hers. They stood across the counter from each other, sorting bin between them. I meant it, he said quietly. I know you did. Eleanor, not yet, she held up her hand. You promised you'd ask after the railroad deal is signed. That could be weeks. Then you'd better be patient. She picked up another handful of nails. I hear it's a virtue. Whoever said that never met a Whitmore woman, she laughed. Real and bright and unguarded, the way she'd laughed at the dance. And Jace knew, with a certainty that went deeper than bone, that he would spend the rest of his life trying to hear that sound again. The railroad came back at 15. Eleanor held firm at 16. They settled at $16.50 with a hiring clause, the first refusal provision, and an additional commitment to build a water tower for the town at the railroad's expense. Samuel Redfield, the lawyer from Prescott, reviewed every word. This is one of the best municipal agreements I've seen in the territory, he told Eleanor. Whoever negotiated this knew exactly what they were doing. The council negotiated it, Eleanor said. The council followed your lead, Miss Whitmore. Don't be modest. It doesn't suit you. She smiled. The signing ceremony was held in the town square on a Saturday afternoon. Worthington came back with 2 associates and a fountain pen. The council signed. Worthington signed. Judge Pruitt witnessed. And when it was done,
when the papers were filed and the hands were shaken, and Worthington's stage pulled out of Red Hollow for the last time, Eleanor stood on the boardwalk and watched it go. The town was alive behind her. Martha Pike selling lemonade, children playing, Tom Dawson hammering new boards on his livery, Mr. Chen, arm still in a sling, supervising repairs to the feed store with the ferocity of a man who'd earned his right to opinions. Red Hollow was rebuilding. Not the way Hale had wanted, torn down and sold off and hollowed out from the inside. The other way, from the ground up, brick by brick, hand by hand, together. Eleanor felt a presence beside her. She didn't have to look. "The deal is signed," Jace said. "It is." "The railroad agreed to your terms." "They did." "The town is safe." "It is." A pause, long and heavy and full of 22 years. "So," Jace said, "can I ask now?" Eleanor turned to him. This man who'd left barefoot and come back scarred, who'd fought outlaws and sorted nails and made coffee every morning without being asked, who'd stepped aside so she could lead and stepped forward when she needed him, who'd kept a promise carved into a cottonwood tree by a boy who had nothing but his word. "You can ask," she said. Jace took off his hat, held it against his chest. "Eleanor Whitmore, I told you once I'd come back when I was a man worth marrying. I don't know if I am. I've got scars I can't explain, and a past I can't erase. But I know this, every good thing I've ever done, I did because of that afternoon by the creek. Because of you." He swallowed. His voice dropped. "I'm not asking you to give up anything. Not the store, not the council, not Red Hollow. I'm asking you to let me stand beside you while you do everything you were always meant to do." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden box, opened it. Inside, a simple gold ring. No diamond, no flourish. Just gold. Honest and unadorned. "Marry me," he said. "Not because I came back, but because you want to." Eleanor looked at the ring, at his hands, scarred, rough, steady, at his face, open, vulnerable, terrified. She thought about the girl by the creek, 10 years old, barefoot, watching a boy carve their initials into a tree. She thought about the years that followed, the waiting, the forgetting, the building of a life that didn't depend on anyone's return. She thought about the woman she'd become, strong, independent, whole. She didn't need James Callahan. She didn't need anyone. And that, exactly that, was why she could choose him. Not from need, not from fear, not from the desperate loneliness of a woman who'd run out of options, but from the clear-eyed, full-hearted freedom of a woman who had everything she needed and wanted something more. "Yes," she said. Jace blinked. "Yes?" "Yes, James Callahan, I will marry you." She took the ring from the box and put it on her own finger, because Eleanor Whitmore did things herself. Always had, always would. "But I have conditions." He let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped for 22 years. "Name them." "I keep my name. Whitmore. This store has been a Whitmore store for 40 years, and it will stay a Whitmore store. Done. I keep my council seat. I'm not stepping down because I'm married. Wouldn't dream of asking. And you learn to make biscuits. Your coffee is perfect, but your biscuits are a disgrace." Jace laughed. It came out broken and ragged, and full of more joy than one sound should hold. He pulled her into his arms, and she let him. And he held her like she was the first real thing he'd touched in 22 years. "Deal," he said into her hair. "All of it. Every word." From across the street,
Henry Whitmore watched from the store window. He didn't come out. Some moments belong to the people living them, not the people watching. But he pressed his hand against the glass and closed his eyes and thought of his wife. Dead 15 years now, buried on the hill behind the church, and whispered, "Our girl's going to be all right, Catherine. She chose well." Then he wiped his eyes, straightened his vest, and went to put the kettle on. Because his future son-in-law would need coffee, and Henry Whitmore did not serve bad coffee in his house. The wedding was held 3 weeks later under the cottonwood tree by the creek. Not in the church, not in the town square. Under the tree, where 2 children had carved their initials and made a promise that shouldn't have survived, but did. Because some promises are tougher than the world that tries to break them. Pastor Williams officiated. Half the town attended. Henry stood beside Eleanor and gave her away with a grip that was firm and steady, and only trembled once, right at the end, when he kissed her forehead and said, "Your mother would be so proud." The vows were simple. Jace didn't make speeches. Eleanor didn't make declarations. They stood face to face and spoke quietly, just to each other. "I promise to stand beside you," Jace said. "Not in front of you, not behind you, beside you, for as long as you'll have me." "I promise to let you," Eleanor said, "even when I think I can do everything alone, especially then." They exchanged rings. They kissed. Mrs. Garfield cried. Tom Dawson blew his nose so loudly that the pastor's wife elbowed him in the ribs. And then they turned to face their neighbors, not as 2 people completing each other, because they'd both been complete long before this moment, but as 2 people choosing to walk the same road, carry the same weight, build the same life. Not rescue, not escape. Partnership. After the ceremony, while the town ate and drank and danced on the creek bank, Eleanor walked to the cottonwood tree alone. She pressed her palm against the bark, feeling for the old carving. It was still there, faint, weathered, but still there. JC plus EW. She traced the letters with her fingertip. Jace appeared beside her. He looked at the carving, at her hand on the bark, at the tree that had held their secret for more than 2 decades. "I was 12, he said. "I used a dull knife. Took me 40 minutes. I watched you do it. You cut your thumb. Bled all over the bark. I told you to stop. You said you'd rather bleed than quit." He put his hand next to hers on the tree. Their fingers touched. "I meant it," he said. "I know you did." She leaned into him. "That's why I waited." "You said you stopped waiting." "I lied." He laughed softly. She felt it through his chest. "Eleanor Callahan," he said, testing the sound. "Eleanor Whitmore," she corrected. "Eleanor Whitmore," he agreed. "My wife." "Your partner." "My partner." She turned in his arms and looked back toward the creek bank, where their neighbors were dancing and laughing and living in the golden light of an Arizona afternoon. Henry sat in a chair with a plate of pie, telling stories to a circle of children who hung on every word. Dolores Gutierrez was teaching Billy Pruitt to 2-step, and he was failing spectacularly. Mr. Chen, arm still bandaged, was arm wrestling Tom Dawson left-handed and winning. This was Red Hollow, broken and rebuilt, betrayed and restored, small and fierce and utterly, stubbornly alive. "We built something, James," Eleanor said softly. "Not just you and me, all of us." "We did." "Promise me something." "Anything." "Promise me we'll protect it, this town, these people, this life we're building. Promise me we'll fight for it, even when it's hard, even when it costs us." Jace looked at the town, at the people, at the woman standing in his arms,
who taught him that strength wasn't about fists or guns or how much land a man could claim. It was about standing up when standing up was dangerous, speaking when silence was easier, choosing justice over safety, truth over comfort, love over fear. "I promise," he said. She nodded, took his hand, walked with him back toward the music and the laughter and the golden, fading light. Behind them, the cottonwood tree stood tall and patient, its roots deep in the Arizona earth, its branches wide enough to shelter 2 sets of initials, carved by children who grew up to keep every promise they ever made. In the years that followed, people would tell the story of Red Hollow's darkest summer, the corrupt sheriff, the outlaw raid, the night Main Street burned, and a woman with a borrowed revolver stood in the smoke and held her town together with nothing but her voice. They'd tell it in saloons and kitchens and quilting circles. They'd tell it to their children and their grandchildren. And every time the story was told, it ended the same way. Not with a gunfight, not with a rescue, not with a man riding in to save the day. It ended with a woman making a choice to fight, a choice to lead, a choice to love, not because she needed to, but because she was strong enough to. And that, they'd say, was the truest kind of Western story there ever was. Not the kind where the cowboy saves the girl, the kind where the girl saves the town. And the cowboy is wise enough to let her.